All right, gang. So we're going to talk about breaking a network down using with IP addresses and why we want to do that. As an example, when we talked about IP addresses and we talked about the private address using the 10.0.0/8. So now the problem with that is that supports roughly 16 million hosts. And trying to manage 16 million hosts is crazy. On one flat network, that would be so much traffic. So we would want to typically do is break networks up into smaller portions of things. So like an example, we could do is make a list. So let's take a list. Let's make a list. So like an example, we can add printer. We can add access points, APs. We can add phones. So these are a couple items that we're looking at. We can have IoT, Internet of Things. So like that could be like an example of Raspberry Pis, Xbox, things like that we could have in there. So what are some other things we can have? We can have servers. Yes, we can have PCs, but I was adding PCs let's take it as an example. We can break PCs down into multiple categories. We can click staff, classroom. We can say hallways. We can break down staff into IT, HR, library, all these different things. So the more we break this network down into smaller groups, it adds complexity and ease of troubleshooting. Because if we assign blocks of IP addresses to all these things, and then if we see something, we know where to go. So, like an example, I see something on 10.15.43.41, I have no idea what that is. So, if we assigned IP address blocks to each one of these things, then we know, oh, that's a printer. And then I know I should go be looking for a printer, looking through the, organization for that printer that's causing this problem. We can bring it down. We can even make it to buildings. We can break this down into smaller categories like, 10.5.3 would be the B building. So we can take our addresses and break it down into smaller chunks of things. When we break down our addresses, we make it into multiple networks that supports less than 16 million, but combined they would still all could support 16 million, but they wouldn't support it as one big network. So we can do all these things. Like an example, does the printer need to go out to the internet? Okay. Yes. A classroom PC. Like an example, do classroom PCs need to go out to the internet after 10 o'clock? Do hallway PCs need to go out after 8 o'clock? So there's all these different things. So by grouping these things together, logically, we can assign different levels of permission. Like an example, should anybody be able to print to the HR printer? No, unless you're in HR. So by grouping everything by the type of location or function these things do, we can now tie this up. So let's take this as an example. So let's say we take 10.1.0.0 and say this is now printers. 10.2.0 are IoT things. 10.3 could be phones. So now if I said, hey, I see something going on 10.2.3.1, we know that's an Internet of Things. But we don't know where in our organization. but we know there is something there. So again, we could even break this down even to a smaller part. So now we've gone from supporting a Class A address, we've now broke it down into 254 networks with each with 65,000 devices by literally changing the mask from an 8 to a 16. This is where carving up the IP addresses and knowing how to do this makes perfect sense. So what's happening is now we've gone from a 255.0.0.0, we're going to 255.0.0. So these sets of octets are basically the network ID, and that's how they become printer, IoT, and phone, because all printers will have 10.1 in it. All IoTs will have 10.2, and all phones will have 10.3 in it. So you can see how we can make this network more smaller and more manageable. By doing that, we know exactly where things are. So we can even go as an example and say, oh, we can have 10.1 for, if we rewrote this, let's rewrite this here real quick as an example of this. So now if I rewrite this and go with 10.1.0 for printers, now we can say that is in the A building. 10.2.0.0 is now printers again, but in the B building. 10.3 is printers in the C building. So now you can see now, and then let's go with 10.10, and we can say this is phones for A. 10.1, 10.11, there's phones again in the B building. So now if I said, oh, there's something going on at 10.3 dot whatever, we know, oh, that's the C building. Now we don't have to go through all the different buildings in our organization. We can go straight to the C building and start looking for something that's plugged into a printer, something that's plugged into where a printer should be plugged in, and now see what's going on with this. So the more we break these networks down to be more manageable, now when it's time for troubleshooting, we know, 10.2.15.16, we know, oh, that's the B building, that's a printer. Or if we say 10.10 something, we know, oh, that's an IP phone in the A building. So that's the reason we want to break up this network is just too much conversations going on a network with 16 million devices, possibly 16 million devices being on a network, on one flat network. That's a lot of conversations going on at the same time. By breaking them up by functions or services or locations, we can now pinpoint where something's going on, because we know you can't have an address in the A building if you're using a 10.3 address or a 10.11 address. We know that's not going to be we know 10.11 will be in the B building, but we know that the other addresses won't be. So it gives us the capability of taking these networks, breaking it into smaller chunks, more manageable. So then we can give people certain rights. So if you live in the A building, well, then you can only print to the A printers. If you live in the B building, you can only print to the B printers. If you live to the C, you can only print to the C building. So it gives us this custom flexibility of adding security with complexity. And why I say it's complexity is because we've got to do additional routing, things like that. But this is a good way of doing things, because let's say we have, let's pick out 10.25 And let's say this does our PCI, which is our credit cards. And let's say, there should be no reason a hallway PC should be able to talk to our credit card terminals. That would make no sense. Or a classroom computer talk to our credit card terminals. So by breaking these networks down into smaller chunks, we can make it more manageable and have the ability of having security, because now we can say only these devices can go to connect to this network. So like an example, we can have only computers that are in building A print to printers in A only. They cannot print to B and they cannot print to C. They can't even see those printers because they're in a different network. So we can set up access where certain things can only see certain networks. So that's the purpose of subnetting. This is a very basic subnetting. We're just not making anything complex, but I'm just explaining why we want to break networks down, because we want to break them down into smaller, manageable chunks of devices. And this is a very easy subnet to break. It's just because it's a class A, we just convert it to a class B, and we have 256 networks because it's a class B, and each one holds 65,000 devices, so it's easy to do. Now, when we get into a little more advanced subnetting, it's going to be a little more work. So then we'd have to figure out what our IP address scheme is. So we did, but like, what is our usable addresses? What is our broadcast? What devices is our router going to be on? Those are things that we have to figure out as a group and make some decisions on some basic stuff. All right, so this is getting a little long. I just want to kind of give you an example of how we can break things down. So again, we took this 10 address that holds 16 million. We broke it down to a class B that's 256 hosts, or 256 networks it supports, and eventually each one supports around 64,000 devices. And this is just an example. We could break down staff by functions like help desk, IT, NOC. We can break these staff down very drastically, like from staff to faculty, classrooms, podium, PC. So we can even make a category called podiums, and have those machines have different rights than the classroom computers do. So there are a ton of different things we can do by grouping these things. So like an example, if the school is closed at night, why would the hallway PCs need to be surfing the web? Or why would we need a print, like an example, printers shouldn't be able to go out to the internet. The internet should not be able to talk to the printer. So we can deny access based on these groups too. So that's what gives us this capability of saying, all right, here's our networks, here's our IP addresses. Do they go out to the internet? Do they not go out to the internet? And we can easily make a spreadsheet. And typically this is not something you're going to do. This is something that's already done. Unless you are working as part of a startup company, you would be involved in creating these addresses, but otherwise someone has created these addresses and they would be in some type of spreadsheet data that you would collect and open up and look. So hopefully this kind of makes a little bit of sense. I'm going to do some more demonstrations like this. So again, come to my workshops, come to my office hours. If you have questions and need help, I'm going to try to make a couple of refresher videos on top of this. All right. I'll see you guys soon.